Thanks for listening to Bloom TV's podcast, where we interview and get the inside scoop on world-leading experts in the flower industry. I'm your host, Devin Kearns. Learn more about all of our experts at bloomtvnetwork.com. Let's get started with today's special guest. Welcome back to Bloom TV's podcast. I'm here with Jennifer Gulizia. Gulizia? Did I say that right?
Good. Hello.
Perfect. I nailed it. She has the Flowering Farmhouse. She's a wife and mother of an adorable little girl. She met her husband kiteboarding, which I hope we get to hear a little bit about that story. That sounds like a fun one. And from her modern farmhouse, she focuses on her family and families in general. And she loves gardening, DIY projects. They built their farmhouse in 2018. She's been a photographer for over a decade, and from this little farmhouse, in her first summer, she planted over 200 dahlias. Way to be aggressive in that first.
Yes, I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
I mean, if you're going to do it, go all the way in, right?
Absolutely.
So awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and I am definitely excited to get to know more about you. And as always, I would love to hear the backstory first and foremost. So what was it that drove you to wanting to have a flower farm and get involved in the flower world?
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me here today. So I guess my flower journey started, oh goodness, almost 30 years ago. Little did I know. My mother's side of the family has always been into gardening. My mom should have been a master gardener. She always had an impeccable garden and landscaped beautifully. She had flowers everywhere. And I'll never forget going up to my cousin's house in the summer months up in Washington outside of Seattle. And you go into the different rooms in the house, and every room had a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and they were all grown from their garden. And I remember telling myself as a young kid that someday I too would grow my own garden and have my own cut flowers in my house. And fast forward to buying my first house, I planted a small garden and then met my husband, moved to Hood River. We lived in a condo. I had to give my gardening a break. And in 2014, we built our first house here in Hood River together. And I bought 64 dahlia tubers and put them in the ground, started growing them, giving bouquets away to friends, and just fell in love with dahlias themselves. And at the time, I was primarily a newborn photographer, and I needed a new photography studio space. So we went to our mortgage broker and said, how do we find a new space? And come to find out, it made more sense to move our house than to find a new commercial space. And so we built a house, which is our current farmhouse, specifically for my newborn photography studio. And in the process, we were looking for land, and we really wanted space where at the time I thought I wanted a U-pick farm. Fast forward, I'm grateful I did not do a U-pick farm, but we found our current modern farmhouse, and I think I just went off track. But anyways, that's how we got started. Is it just started small. I took those 64 dahlia tubers from our last house, and our first summer here, I had divided them, came up with about 200 dahlias is what I had space for, and I gave away the rest of the tubers, and I planted them, and the rest was kind of history.
Wow. So obviously you felt a connection when you were young.
Yes.
To the flowers, and you really were fortunate to be able to be exposed to those, and it drove a certain behavior. But what was the real, like, I know this is what I want to do? When was that moment?
It was actually when I was dropping my daughter off at preschool one day, while we were building our house. At her preschool, they had this amazing garden that was where the kids, 2 to 4 year olds, would get to go out and pick flowers and vegetables. And I said something to the head teacher there, and I said, this is amazing. And she said, well, have you heard of Floret? And I was like, no. And of course, this was about, 4 or 5 years ago, when she'd come out with her first book on cut flower gardening. So I went home that night, I bought the book, started looking through it and thinking, oh my goodness, I could grow my own cut flowers. And about the same time, I, as a photographer, photographed a wedding. and one of my brides grew the most beautiful cafe au lait dahlias for her wedding. And when I got to the wedding, I said to her, "These are amazing." And she said, "I grew them myself."
Mm.
And here I am thinking, I've got all of these dahlias growing in my own yard. I could be doing the same thing. And so I went to the local florist and I said, "Do you have any need for flowers?" And they were like, "Well, of course, we love using local flowers." And I quickly found out that just growing dahlias was not enough to sustain a relationship with the florists. And I was growing dahlias, but they weren't as healthy and strong and robust as they probably should be. And a lot of it was my soil and my lack of knowledge of I could grow a garden, but being a flower farmer was a totally different thing. And about that same time, I learned about Florette's online workshop for intensive flower farming. And so for my birthday that year, my husband gave me the workshop. And so January of 2020, little did I know that we were going into COVID at the time. It was perfect timing to really, oh no, now, yeah, in 2020. I'm a alum of the class of 2020 of Florette. So I took the workshop then, and it really spurred my flower farm forward, just understanding the basics of what it takes. It's not, her course isn't about how to grow the beautiful flowers as much as it is how to market yourself, how to set up your irrigation. Why does the soil matter? When should you start your seeds? And so you really get a great foundation of all the basic principles you need to get your hands dirty. Literally.
Yeah, literally. That's incredible because you fast forward, and I know when looking at your Instagram, not only do you have beautiful photos, obviously, you've got over 19,000 people following you, which is that's pretty impressive as well. So congratulations on taking that leap and knowing you want to. I'm really excited to hear more about what's coming and what you're up to these days and what people can really expect from you and the flower farm. But first, I've actually got to know, and I kind of set the tone for this because you had mentioned to me that you and your husband met in a really unique way that I think is cool, based on a water sport and having him own a water sporting company. So how'd you meet? Tell me that story.
So well, if you backtrack to my childhood, I learned to windsurf at Fern Ridge Reservoir in Eugene, Oregon, at a summer camp when I was 14 years old, and decided that I wanted to learn how to windsurf. So that following winter, my family was in Hawaii. And so for Christmas, my parents gifted me a windsurfing lesson on the big island of Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
And I decided I really want to do this someday. And in college, I went to the University of Portland. And while I was there, I learned about Hood River and that you could go out and windsurf, and it was only an hour away from me. So after college, I moved out to Hood River. All I knew is that I wanted to windsurf. And so I found a job that allowed me to windsurf. That job transferred me back to Portland. And on the weekends, I'd come out and windsurf. And I was never windsurfing. You can get out on the water right away, but it's quite a progression. There's a lot to learn before you can be really good out on the Columbia River. We're the windsurfing capital of the world. We have very strong, consistent winds that make flower farming very challenging. But anyways, I had someone dare me to take a kiteboarding lesson. So I took a bet and I gave kiteboarding a try. And I fell in love with it. It was totally different than windsurfing, but it had so much less gear involved. It was something that I could get out on the water after just a handful of lessons versus years of practicing the windsurfing. So about a year after the first year of my windsurfing lessons, I had to take some time off because I'd broken my knee. And upon returning to the kiteboarding lessons, I just decided that I needed one more lesson before going out on my own. So my husband actually taught my last kiteboarding lesson. And from there, we became good friends. We started dating. And then he at the time was traveling around the world. He would go from Hood River to South Padre to Mexico teaching kiteboarding lessons. And so the deal was that if I was going to move back to Hood River, he also had to find a job in Hood River. So he landed a job at a place called Big Winds. So it's one of the largest windsurfing, stand-up paddleboarding, and kiteboarding retailers in the world. And today he's now one of the partners there. And that has allowed me to, I switched careers, started photography back in 2011. And I still do a little bit of photography, but the flower business has definitely become a huge passion of mine and takes up the bulk of my time.
That's amazing. So you guys were literally blown together
Yes.
by this incredible sport and by the wind.
Yes.
Um, Real quick, I'm just curious because I'm kind of ignorant when it comes to that particular sport. What's the difference between kite surfing and windsurfing?
So windsurfing, you have a board that has a mast attached to it and a sail.
Hmm.
Kiteboarding, you
Hmm.
have either a surfboard or a twin tip board, and then you're harnessed in and attached to a kite line that has usually 3 lines and a giant kite up in the sky. To be honest with you, because of my photography and the flower business, I have not kited in years. Since stand-up paddleboarding became super popular, oh goodness, probably almost a decade ago, right about when I started, really got into my photography. So I
Yeah.
started doing more stand-up paddleboarding than the
Mhm.
kiteboarding. I just couldn't risk with my 2 lines of work. I can't risk having my hands injured.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of accident prone on the water. So um, that has been, I haven't done it as much. There's a new sport called wing surfing that kind of combines windsurfing and kiteboarding, and you have your surfboard, like a windsurf type board, and then you have a wing that is an inflatable, just like an inflatable kite, but it's more like a windsurf sail. My goal is to learn how to do that next summer, if there's
Interesting.
time.
It's always evolving, and sounds like you absolutely love it, but you probably have a stronger passion for the photography and the flowers right now. So you're
Absolutely.
being a little more cautious. I love paddleboarding for sure, and I've always wanted to try the kite surfing. But well, thanks for going down that rabbit hole. I always love understanding how people connect and how people meet, and there's always a great story behind our passions that usually lead us to love of all kinds of things, including love of another person. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
So what are you up to with this incredible farmhouse and farm of yours?
Absolutely. Well, gosh, it is always evolving. This will be my 4th season that we're coming into now. And when I first started, I was like, oh, there's always this great shoulder season. And now I'm realizing as I grow, there's really not a shoulder season. I'm taking this week off to try and be present with my family, do some holiday baking. But after the holidays, it's go time again. I mean, my eucalyptus seeds will be starting this year. So we actually lease all of the space that we grow on. When I started out, I grew on our 1/3 of an acre, the 200 dahlias. And when I realized that I needed more space, I went to my neighbor and said, you have this great field that you're not using. Can I lease it from you? And she said, absolutely.
Hmm.
And that was a 1/4 of an acre. So for 2 years, I grew on the 1/4 of an acre. And after the first year, I needed more space. I had grown 400 dahlias, and this last summer, I wanted to grow even more. So I went to my other neighbor on the other side of us is a 2-acre field. And we're really unique because we are surrounded by homes. And there's this 2-acre parcel right next to our house in the middle of a residential neighborhood that used to be farmland. And so I went to my neighbor and I asked if I could lease that from her also. And she also said yes. So I leased 2 pieces of land, one piece directly behind our house and one piece directly to the west of our house. And I believe in growing slowly so that I can do a good job. I am very much into making sure that I learn the steps as I go, being a newer flower farmer. So I went from a 1/4 acre to a 1/2 an acre. And now for this following season, we're going to a full acre.
Hmm.
We will be growing, I don't know yet, I have to count all the dahlia tubers, but we'll be growing somewhere between 2 and 3,000 dahlias this summer. So substantially growing. We went from 200, 400, 800. And if everything goes well, between 2 and 3,000 dahlias this next summer.
Wow.
And then we'll have, I think we have about 70 varieties of other flowers that will also be growing here. We're extending our season. We just planted 2 70-foot rows of peonies, 2 rows of narcissus, and there was a huge tulip shortage this year. So we planted about 2,000 tulips. Over half of our order was unfortunately canceled due to lack of inventory. But we are trying to grow, extend our season out. with more flowers. So branching out beyond just the dahlias, but the dahlias is definitely my baby.
That's incredible. Do you find that the narcissists take up all your time? So that's just a
Oh,
narcissistic
no.
view.
I've never grown so for those that are listening that don't know, they're daffodils. And it's just kind of a fancy way of saying daffodil. I've never grown them before. So I'm actually really excited to have them bloom this spring.
That's amazing. So I'm actually realizing that I would love to be, I'm making a commitment in my life that I'm going to have several acres and just find a neighbor like you that wants to beautify my entire acreage and handle all the work, and I just get to look out over the flowers.
There's a lot of people that do that.
It's a pretty good gig for them.
Yes. I'm very grateful because land is very hard to come by here. So
Yeah, I bet.
yes.
I bet. That's amazing. What is it that you, aside from the 2,000 dahlias and all the other flowers that you're growing, what's next for the business side of this?
Well, I have realized over the last 2 years, several things that have been kind of become a passion project of mine. And I have to be careful as I speak about them because there's still so much learning that I personally have to do.
Yeah.
But the two things that I am super passionate about and growing our business is one, making sure that we help advance the local flower movement, and
Mm.
two, learning and becoming a more sustainable flower farm. It's super important to me that we figure out ways to be a regenerative flower farmer. So,
What is the passion behind that? Why is that important for those that may not understand?
which one do you want me to touch on first?
Um, let's start with the local sourcing.
Sure. They both go hand in hand, but with the local sourcing, uh, I feel like my eyes have been opened to this industry that I had no idea about before becoming a flower farmer. As you start to learn more about the flower industry, I could not believe some of the pesticides
Mm.
and chemicals that are allowed to be used in other countries that can be imported in on our flowers. So if you go to the grocery store and you purchase a bouquet of roses that have been imported in from another country, they have probably been sprayed with toxic chemicals, harmful pesticides that one would be illegal if they were sprayed on your food packaging, but there's no regulation in our country for what gets imported in. So when you are importing in these flowers, you're bringing harmful chemicals into your house. Not only that, you're harming the workers. These workers overseas are often exposed to terrible chemicals, harmful working conditions. And then on top of that, the amount of CO2s that are emitted, the carbon emissions, just by transferring them in by plane, are so high that we are then contributing to the carbon emissions. Whereas if you buy from a local farmer, most likely they're going to be chemical free, pesticide free, no harmful chemicals. You're supporting a local farmer and you're not contributing to the carbon emissions.
Mm.
So that
Yeah.
is one thing that I'm really passionate about.
And I feel like, there's so much education behind this, and one of the simplest questions that might be obvious to some but maybe not others, and I always love just being clear and poignant on the importance of this. Okay, so I can understand why it's important to not have toxic chemicals on my flowers. I definitely don't want workers to be exposed to those chemicals. Those feel obvious. But if I go to the local grocery store and I grab those roses, if I'm not eating the rose, how is the poison affecting me?
That's a great question. I mean, the toxins are being released into the air, so they're still coming into your house,
Yeah.
whether you're putting them in your vase, cutting them, releasing them into the water. I'm not an expert on this section, so I don't want to.
No, that's probably right.
But
Yeah.
yes, just like, gosh, just like you could get me started on artificial Christmas trees too. I mean,
Yeah.
being imported from another country and the chemicals used in the manufacturing process. Um,
Yeah,
that's
I
a
think
huge
that's
movement.
right. And the thing that hits me too is the largest absorbing organ in our body isn't our mouth, it's actually our skin, right? So if you're pulling those flowers out and touching those flowers and touching the chemicals, you're absorbing maybe just as much. And we don't think about that. So it's always important.
That's a great
And
point.
again, yeah. And I think the biggest piece of this is there's enough out there, meaning, we think, okay, so what about the farmer that wants to employ people, and those people are being fed by that? Well, there's enough people maybe in that region, if that region focuses locally, right? So we just have to reverse our thinking. And I love having this conversation. I love that you're bringing it up. What else is important to you regarding the education that I think could help people make better purchasing decisions?
Sure. Well, let's hear. In regards to the local flowers or the regenerative?
Regenerative is next topic, probably.
Yeah. So in terms of that, I have just done a lot of reading about, well, one, I learned firsthand how important soil fertility is. Everyone says, get a soil test, get a soil test, get a soil test. And you say, oh, I'll be fine. I've got enough other expenses my first few years. And then all of a sudden you realize things aren't growing quite like they should be. And so this last year I worked with our local compost company, and we did a soil test and discovered quite a few deficiencies in the soil, and even some diseases that are in the soil. And part of that comes from things being sprayed over the past. There's chemicals in our soil already from other pesticides, water runoff. And our soil is losing a lot of the micronutrients inside of it because we have overworked, over sprayed our fields for so long that, boy, I feel like I'm jumping all over here, and I apologize.
No, it's great.
For example, let me backtrack and just go back to one example. One thing is beneficial bugs. If you have enough beneficial insects, your plants are going to be much healthier because the beneficials are going to eat all of the, well, not all, but they're going to keep the predators intact, and so that they don't get out of control. Well, if you spray neem oil, you're killing the bees, you're hurting the frogs. If you put down sluggo to keep the slugs away, you're also hurting the frogs. So we are putting these chemicals down that are, one, killing the beneficial insects that are there to provide or to keep the soil and the fertility and the plant life in balance and in check. And us humans are messing with that, just like by putting chemicals in the ground, the overuse of fertilizers. This last year, we switched to only using compost tea. And so we spray compost tea not as often as I would like, just because we got busy. We probably should have done it more, but we are trying to go away from no sprays, releasing as many beneficial insects as we can, and really trying to regenerate the soil, because every time you dig into the soil, so if you till your fields, you are taking up all the good bacteria in the soil that is taking away from the soil fertility, and the fertility is what the plants need to grow. So if you want a beautiful dahlia plant that's going to pump out tons of blooms, you want the right soil balance with strong fertility and lots of beneficial insects that are going to eat those bad bugs that are coming to try and destroy your crop.
Yeah.
But what we're doing by putting all these fertilizers in the ground and different chemicals and spraying things is we are destroying the natural environment for our plants.
You know what this reminds me of is, well, two things. One, I don't know if you've heard yet of soil balance, and Peter Saavedra. He's one of our partners and probably one of the only soil focused partners we'll have because of what you're talking about, and his science and what they've discovered over the last 20 years. I'll make the introduction for the two of you. It's incredible. He's also done a podcast with us. And I'll send you that link so you can hear a little bit more about his passion and how he got involved. But it's reminding me of, for those that may not have seen this, I think it's on Netflix, but The Biggest Little Farm.
Yes.
And right. And they struggled in the beginning, and it took a full 7-year cycle to allow nature to do what it does best. But all of a sudden, 7 years in, when you allowed nature to do what it does best, you don't have as many predators, and you don't have as many overwhelming things that are eating and destroying the plants. It's actually working in harmony, because that's how we all got here. It originally was working in harmony before we decided to create all these dangerous chemicals and do things our way. So
Yes.
I love that you're focused on that, and I love that you're passionate about it, and I love, as you learn, for you to share more with us, for sure. I love that so much, and thank you for caring, and thank you for being focused on doing, and not just talking about it.
Well, my hope is that I can take the Bloom audience along with me. And
Yeah,
I'm sure there's going to be plenty of struggles as I learn these different methods of switching from the conventional tilling to, I have read some that say you may not be able to go completely no till at first, especially as I'm breaking into a field that hasn't been touched in over 50 years. But I am excited to share these experiences and bring people along so that hopefully my mistakes can help other people avoid some of those mistakes or learn from them, so that more people can go to the no-till regenerative farming approach. Whether you have a backyard garden or a 5-acre field, we can
yeah,
all make a difference.
yeah.
So
It matters. If you're gardening in the backyard, your soil is the most important thing that is feeding the nutrients you might be consuming, or the things that you're growing in the backyard. So yeah, I'm excited to go on that journey with you. And that's a perfect segue. Is this a part of what we can expect in what you're sharing on Bloom? And what else will you be talking about?
absolutely. So the local flower movement, the regenerative farming are two big passions of mine that I look forward to sharing more about.
Mm.
I want to do some grow alongs so people can start their seeds with me. I am in zone 7B in Oregon. And so my seed starting time may be different than others, but by knowing the starting process and how I start, I have very high success germination rates. Hopefully those things can help inspire and teach others so that they can have a successful growing season. And then of course, dahlias are my passion. On my blog, I have written quite a few very in-depth articles, and I plan to share a lot of that. I think there's not a lot spoken about dahlia disease.
Mm.
And right now we are at a critical point in the dahlia industry, I'd say, that if we don't get some of these diseases under control, I'm afraid that we won't have dahlias in the future. I know that's a big thing to say. That's a big thing to say, but I worked closely with the Oregon Department of Agriculture this last year. I had planned to have actually twice as many dahlias this last year as I did. I had ordered a huge wholesale order, and my wholesale order came completely infected with disease.
Mm.
And I think there were 3 varieties out of 15 varieties that I had brought in that were not infected with leafy gal or crown gal. And so all of them had to be tossed.
Mm.
And the problem is that going back to the local flowers and the regulation in the United States, we don't have a lot of regulation on what gets imported into the United States.
Mm.
So none of these were even checked for disease that were coming in. And so what's scary is that not only did they come to me, and I as a grower was able to recognize it and dispose of them and contact the Department of Agriculture. And when I say dispose of them, they literally went in garbage bags and went to our dump, where they cannot end up in compost, because if they end up in compost, then the disease can spread through the soil.
Mm.
So it is super important to me to educate people to talk about even the dirty side of the flower farming. I shared a few times I had some disease. Anyone that grows dahlias long enough is going to come across disease. If you have leaf hoppers, any kind of bugs that can come into your garden, they can carry the disease. So you can do everything in your power, but if you know how to recognize it, you can stop it in its tracks and keep it from spreading throughout the rest of your garden. So I think it's important that we have those conversations and that people know what to look for, because I have so many people sending me pictures on Instagram all the time. They say, does this look normal to you? And they're sending me a picture of a dahlia leaf that has mosaic virus. And what you don't realize is if that plant has the mosaic virus, you use your floral snips and you cut a dahlia, and then you go to the next plant and you cut it, you've just transferred that virus to the next plant. Where what you really need to do is you need to dig up that whole plant and dispose of it in the trash can so that it can't get back into the soil. And all across Facebook, you see there's groups of 80,000 people trading dahlias left and right. And there's a lot of disease getting traded. So maybe not related to what I'm going to talk about on Bloom, but one thing I'd encourage people is to know who they're buying their dahlias from.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's kind of the dahlia mania. And I would encourage people, if you're going to be buying dahlias, which you should, make sure you're buying them from growers who are licensed and inspected by their departments of agriculture. Means that they're taking the time to do the process right. Are they carefully cleaning individually and washing and making sure that their plants are disease free? Because the worst thing you could do is bring in these beautiful flowers and spread a disease to your whole garden.
Yeah. It sounds like we might have a book in a series called The Down and Dirty of the Dahlia.
There you go. I like it.
That is, it's such important information. And I feel like as this does get popular, not just dahlias, but gardening in general.
Absolutely.
It is going to be important to have some of that oversight and information that people may or may not be willing to share because of profit or whatever reason is driving that behavior, right? Fear. So I love that you're willing to step out there and really help and serve in a way that protects these important and precious plants. And they're beautiful, but they can also, like anything, have a shadow side, right? So
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for being willing to step up and be that voice. I think it's so important.
Thank you.
So tell us what we can, tell us where we can reach you and how we can find you on Bloom, and give us an idea of what that next step for these viewers should be.
Absolutely. Well, I have a blog where I share my home and garden and some of my favorite recipes as well. And that is thefloweringfarmhouse.com. And then I'm on Instagram at the Flowering Farmhouse. And of course, I'll be joining you on Bloom TV, and I can't wait.
I know the profile is going to be amazing. Your videos are going to be amazing. And I'm so excited for people to follow you and join you for the story. I know this isn't going to be our last podcast by any means too. And I'd love to go deeper as we get further into this, as you are wanting to educate, use this part of it as a platform too, because I think in our podcast, as people are gardening, as we move through the winter into the spring, having something that they can listen to while they're out in the soil would be super important. So I'd love for you to bring that education back to us. And we're so grateful to have you a part of Bloom TV and a part of the team. And I know Monica absolutely is so excited to have you here. And
thank you. I'm excited too. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to our next conversation.
I do as well. Thank you. And happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have built the world's first flower-focused streaming network, bringing the public educational and entertaining shows that highlight the magic of flowers. Learn how to heal through flowers, cook with flowers, design your living space to reflect nature, make crafts using florals, sustainably garden, and so much more. We are your network for all things floral. Join us at Bloom TV as we help bring beauty to the lives of people and the planet through nature's most beautiful creation, the flower.